Today's video is actually a cut from last Sunday's live stream where I talked about the O3 air unit and the differences between the power level at CE, FCC and the ham file. What I did was walk you through the actual RF differences on a spectrum analyzer, but I also discussed a bit around the strange behaviour where the O3 air unit doesn't actually reach full power unless it receives an arming command over MSP. As this is really useful information, I've decided to share it separately and it's going to be here for you today. Now, just before we get into it, I just want to say if you find this video useful, please do consider checking out the links in the description to my Patreon. If you have any questions, please do put it in the comment section as well, and I will try and answer them as soon as I can. Anyway, let's get on with it. The first thing I'll talk about is that O3 and the power usage. I had to put out an updated video. Now, the original video was released based on my bench testing, which was done after my FCC video. So to explain the timelines here, because there is some quirks to understand, okay, I released the FCC video, which I made here on the bench, 100% working with the ham file hack, no issues at all. In that FCC video, let me just find it so I can show it to you. I made this video which I show you the FCC behavior of the O3 air unit. Now this was made with an O3 air unit. Let me just skip through it. Let me just find it. So here we go. This was the O3 carrier in CE mode. Notice here from that is in standby mode. Now what I mean by standby mode is not armed in low power mode. Okay, very important. Not armed but in low power mode. Then let me just wait for it to kick. You'll see the carrier get darker in a second. We'll just wait for it a second. There we go. That is me arming the aircraft. Low power mode was still turned on, but arming the aircraft kicks it out of low power mode into full power. That was before the ham file hack. We then went away and did the same tests after the hack. Low power mode before arming. Wait for it to arm. 2 seconds. Boom. Massive amounts more power. Okay? Just look. That line there is where the original power level was at. Hugely more. All fine. All good. Everyone's happy. Until I started doing more bench testing and couldn't get it to do it again after I released the video. And started to find that I was stuck in FCE or FCC, whatever it was, and I'll come on to that in a minute, but power mode. All of my testing was preventing it going to the higher output. And actually, it turns out that the O3 air unit works differently to the Vista and the DJI air unit. On the DJI air unit, it would go to full power output, whatever that is, so whatever the wattage you've set or with hacks, it will go to when you arm the aircraft or you turn off low power mode. It would go to the same level depending on which one you did. It didn't matter. Turn off low power mode. If you had it set to 1200, it would go to 1200. Arm the aircraft in low power mode. It turns off low power mode and goes to 1200. It is the same. Low power mode and arming, turn low power mode off was the same as arming. However, in O3, that isn't the case. Low power mode in O3 is more related to the video performance than it is RF power. And what I mean by that is when low power mode is turned on, it is pumping far less frames, far less resolution through the link. Turning low power mode off kicks the resolution up to the full amount and all of that. However, it doesn't necessarily kick it into full RF output. And when I was doing my second set of bench testing, I wasn't actually arming. I was simply turning off low power mode, assuming it was exactly the same as the Vista and the DJI air unit, and it isn't. Now, Bruce has said, is it adaptive power? Not in my tests. I have done extensive testing and I have not at any point seen the air unit increase its power output when low power mode is turned off up to the level it should go to. It doesn't move. And I have tested this by moving the goggles a massive distance away and forcing them basically into signal loss. Yes, I know the DJI guy has said the power is dynamic, and I'm not saying he isn't right, but I'll come on to that in a minute, because you've got to understand the level differences here between power outputs. Dynamic could be 200 watts, not the difference between CE at 25 milliwatts and FCC at, say, 700 milliwatts. It is definitely not shifting that much. I can guarantee it. It may be shifting very small amounts, which is hard to detect in my testing, but what it isn't doing is doing huge jumps. So I was having huge amounts of issues, and then I discovered that issue, and I've put a video together just to show you guys this before I move on to the next one. So this is showing you the behavior. Okay, so this is the O3, no ham file, no ham, so it would be stock for me, CE, low power mode on. Okay, if we then watch the carrier, all I have done now is turned off low power mode. Note, I'll just go back. None of these carriers have increased in height. All that has happened is more data has moved through the link. When you look here, it's a much... The reason the carrier isn't as dark is because there's much less data moving through. Yes, there's less power, but much less data. The overall carrier peak power is the same, but there's just much less of it. Also notice the other carriers here, which is the goggle carriers, are hovering a little bit higher, about minus 50 dBm, and nothing's changing. Again, when I arm, the carrier goes darker, but the overall RF output has not increased. It is basically still at the lower level. Okay? And this was what was confusing me, because my initial test, I was doing it with a quad that was ready to fly. Now, we will add the ham file and show you the same thing again. Okay? So ham file, first of all, first thing to note is this. Whereas I said the goggles carriers before were roughly minus 50 dBm here, they are now massively up towards minus 30 dBm. So the goggles has increased output at this point, okay? But if we look at the carrier for the aircraft, it has not. And when I've turned off low power mode, again, it is outputting exactly the same amount of power as it was before. However, the goggle carriers have increased. It is only when I arm the aircraft, do you see that massive increase in power? Okay, so I'll go there, ready, boom. It is only at the point of arming does the O3 push to maximum output. Now, this is different behavior to the FPV air unit and the Vista. I've gone back and double checked. It is not the same behavior. Now, what this means is the air unit only goes to maximum RF when it receives an MSP arming command, regardless of the status of low power in the goggles. But it means if you're someone that is flying without a flight controller and you're turning off low power mode, you are not getting the maximum output that is available from the system. Again, I have done all the testing, and at no point have I seen any dynamic behavior with regards to this from this system. So you're going to have to put a flight controller in for arming purposes. How many people are going to try and do it without one, I don't know. But it's just worth noting, especially if you're using it on a car or a boat or something like that. Okay, so I've seen no dynamic power as a result of this. Okay, it's just that simple. Now, I'm not saying that there isn't some smaller movements, and I'll show why that's the case in a minute. Okay? But this is what caught me out. So the ham file works, but you've got to have an arming command for it. Now, this leads on to the next set of questions of, now we know the ham file works, is it the same level of RF power as FCC mode. I've called the ham file FCC mode, but it wasn't clear if it was or not. And I've actually finally been able to do some testing on this. And whilst I'm not going to tell you it's exactly the same power, what I am going to be able to tell you is it is very close. I don't believe it is anymore myself. I want to do a bit more testing, but what it certainly isn't is a dramatic amount more than FCC mode. And I'm going to show you that now. So if I just pause that a second and go back to the desktop. Okay, so this is a setup at a fixed distance, okay? Nothing moves. The only thing that changes is the status. We start in CE mode, we move to FCC mode, and then we move to the ham file. Okay, so this is CE mode output. Now, this isn't directly in front of it on the bench. This is at a distance, okay, to be able to properly show this. Video carrier over here, goggles carriers over here. Note the video carrier is about minus 76 dBm. Goggles carriers peaking at about minus 45, on average minus 50, somewhere on that area there, okay? So, what you're seeing here, just let me play it again, is disarmed, armed when it goes darker. I'm not using low power mode here, we're using arming. So, armed, disarmed, same power output, CE, nice and simple. You can see a little fluctuation, don't worry about that, it's just because of the way I'm testing this. But overall, you can see that's where we're at with CE. Okay, now we are in proper FCC mode. Okay, not ham file. This is actually FCC mode. And what you're going to see here is the FCC mode kick in because I found a way of triggering it. Okay, so at the moment, what you're seeing on the display is actually CE. And then I'm going to stop it at the point. If you watch the goggle carriers, you'll see them jump up when we hit FCC mode. It's just changed channel because I've rebooted it. Boom. Did you see that point there? That was the point it entered FCC mode. This isn't ham file, this is FCC. I'll just play that back again. 1 second. I triggered FCC mode. Boom. Goggles carriers increased dramatically. Okay. I'm just going to put the mouse there. That's where it was before, minus 50. And then we're up back to that minus 30. Okay. As we're disarmed, you can still see the video carrier is at that same very low level. If I now arm, you will see the video carrier increase to a higher level than we were getting in CE. This line is CE. There you go. You can now see in FCC, the video carrier is more up to peaking at about minus 65 dBm, minus 60 to 65. Ignore the slope. It's just the way I'm reading it. But there, so we're seeing CE level, we saw the carrier didn't increase in output from here. FCC up to here. Okay, so FCC, a clear increase in power. Now, the real question is the ham file any more power than FCC? That is the interesting point. So, what I've redone is we moved the line about minus 67 dB was roughly where FCC was, that area there. We're now under the ham file. What I will say is the goggle carriers have not increased, no change. And actually, the RF output hasn't really changed either. It appears to be basically the same. So at this moment in time, as I understand it, and in my testing, and I'll explain what's just happened there in a second, the ham file appears to be the same output as FCC. I'm not convinced it's really any more at this moment in time. What you've just seen there, if I just show there, this is in auto mode. So the goggles carriers are next to the video carrier. But I switch it into manual mode just to see if there's any difference. And what you'll see in manual mode, sorry, let me just go back to there. what you'll see in manual mode in a minute is the goggle carriers move on top of the video carrier. And that happens when you go into manual mode on O3, it shifts, there you go, look, it shifts the goggle carriers onto the same carrier as the video carrier to save space on the band. So actually, if you're running around other people, you're probably better in manual mode in some ways, because it moves the goggle carriers on top. So again, when you're in auto, let me go back to auto, the goggle carriers are next to it, and then they shift on top in manual mode. Interesting behavior. I'll talk about that a bit more later. So, at this moment in time, I don't believe Hamfile is any more power than FCC. Maybe, but I have spotted something, and I need to investigate more, and I'm going to show you it. And I want to show you this again. So, just note, when we arm with the Hamfile, right? Let me just get back to it. Right. When we arm with the Hamfile, just watch. It's gone up to full power. Look at the areas around the carrier, right? There's a bit of increase either side there and there, but nothing spectacular. I'm just going to play back again, but just watch the carrier for changes. Up. And it remains the same. It doesn't change. Nothing changes on this carrier. When it moves up, it just goes up, boom, and it stays that way. Nothing changes on it. However, watch this. Let me find the FCC carrier. Watch FCC, right? I spotted this. Ready? Watch the video carrier and really look around it and watch the height of it a little bit as well. Did you see that then? It went up and then dropped back down. Now, in my checks, the drop down level actually looks the same as the ham level. However, it does appear to be the case that in FCC mode, it's actually pulsing to a higher level and then dropping down. I'll just show you it again. There you go. So we'll play it up, and then down. Less than a second, but it's doing it. Now, this leads me to think there's more power on the table that DJI haven't given us here. And we're going to have to wait and see and find out. Now, I'm just going to answer one more thing again, because I've said it already. I have done a dramatic amount of testing on, is there any change in RF output with regards to range? And I can tell you now, with regards to the quad, I am seeing nothing. I know the DJI guy has said it's dynamic, and I'm not saying it's not. And that little bit you've just seen may be the hint of something dynamic that we haven't been able to figure out yet. But I have taken the goggles to the edge of range, down to 1 megabits, and then dropping it off. I've got a stone house. I can literally put the quad here on my bench, right next to my analyzer, walk off with the goggles and the remote, and measure the RF output from the quad in a static situation. If it's increasing, I will see it on that analyzer, and I'm not. So I'm not seeing anything at the moment. So, to summarize all of this up, O3 Hamfile absolutely works. In my opinion, it triggers to about the same power level as FCC. If you are in FCC, there is still a benefit to using the Hamfile because it will give you more channels available. In FCC, you don't get any more channels than you do in CE. You still only have 1 channel in 40 megabits a second or 3 channels in 10 and 20 megabits a second. Using the Hamfile will open that up to 3 channels in 40 and 7 channels in 10 and 20. What I don't think it's going to do, though, is give you any additional power. However, I would still do it. Overall, the Hamfile works, but again, it will only enter maximum RF output when you've triggered the arming command via MSP. At no point have I seen it remotely go up to full power with the low power mode. And it's interesting, and it's completely different behavior for low power mode. The low power mode on the O3 air unit is more about image quality and data rate, whereas the low power mode on the original FPV system was RF power. And it's that simple. And that is the situation. It really is that simple. The ham file also works on both the O3 air unit with the V2 goggles and the Goggle 2 as well. It's exactly the same. And the behavior is identical on the Avata, but I wouldn't have known about that because there's no way on the Avata that I would have used it without arming. It's exactly the same on the Avata as well. This pretty much wraps up all of my testing on the ham file. I know where everything's at now. The next challenge is going to be the testing on the Vista and the DJI O3, the DJI Air unit on the Goggles 2 when that compatibility gets out fully. I have been testing it because I do have that beta firmware. However, I'm not comfortable doing too much testing. What I want to do is test it when it hits public release. What I do know is, whilst I originally said the NACO file didn't work, it actually does. I think that was a mistake on my side, or at least my air unit wasn't playing ball. I have now confirmed that the NACO file does still work on the O3, on the normal air unit with the Goggles 2. The problem is, though, we don't know what the RF power level is because there's still no way of setting the power level on the Goggles 2, even when using the Vista. What is interesting in that pre-release firmware is the ham file increases the RF output of the air unit, but not the goggles, and the NACO file on the air unit increases the power output of the air unit, but not the goggles, and the ham file increases the power output of the goggles and gives you more channels. So it's looking like, and this isn't confirmed 100% yet, that when DJI bring out support on the Goggles 2, you're going to put NACO on the air unit, not the O3 one, the Vista or DJI FPV air unit, and then put the ham file on the goggles. You're probably going to have to do both. SD on the Goggles 2, yeah, correct. It's looking like you've got to do both. What I'm not seeing is a 1200 watt mode. There's no 1200 milliwatt mode, doesn't seem to work. And what I don't know yet is what that RF power level is. I'm going to have to do a lot of testing to understand where we end up on that. You know, we only really knew... Yeah, I can't... Comparing RF power is complex, far rowies. There is such a subtle difference between 700 milliwatts and 1200 milliwatts on a spectrum analyzer. Yes, I can see it, but it could be the difference between 1000 and 1200 and 900. It's not an exact science, and that's the bit I'm struggling with at the moment. So it's not. I can tell, especially when you step through them. And you have to understand, really, the only reason we believe DJI system is at 1200 milliwatts because it says so. That's the only real reason we know. We haven't measured it. So that's the situation.